The afternoon sun hung low over the Vermont hills when the earth itself seemed to roar. A single crack, then silence. When the smoke cleared, a man lay upon the ground, his workmen standing motionless around him. Yet within minutes, impossibly, he was upright. He was speaking. He was asking the physician, in words that would echo through the corridors of medical science for generations, what business he had brought with him. What, in the name of all reason, had just survived. It was the 13th day of September 1848. The village of Cavendish, in Windsor County, Vermont, lay amid the wooded hills of New England, its air sharp with the onset of autumn and the ever-present smell of blasting, minus powder. The Rutland and Burlington Railroad Company was pressing its iron ambitions southward through the rocky landscape, and with it came the sounds that had come to define the age, the crack of hammer upon stone, the shouts of working men, the rumble of ox carts laden with earth and rubble. Among the foremen directing this labour stood one Phineas P. Gage, 25 years of age, a man held in uncommonly high regard by his employers and by the men who worked beneath him. He was by every account a figure of vigour and steady purpose, muscular in frame, clear in mind, possessed of an iron will that matched the tool he carried at his side. That tool was his own tamping iron, custom-made, 3 feet 7 inches in length, 1 1/4 inches in diameter, weighing 13 1/4 pounds. And tapering to a point at one end, it was the instrument of his trade, the constant companion of his working days. It would, before dusk fell upon those Vermont hills, become the instrument of the most improbable survival in the annals of surgery. Phineas P. Gage was born in July of 1823 in Grafton County, New Hampshire, the eldest of 5 children born to Jesse Eaton Gage and Hannah Trussell Gage, née Swetland. Little is recorded of his early years beyond the fact that he was literate, capable of reading and writing, and that he had been raised in minus circumstances befitting the farming families of that northern New England region, Mainz. Those who encountered him before the day that would make his name known throughout the medical world described him as a man of exceptional qualities. His attending physician, Dr. John Martyn Harlow, who had known Gage prior to the accident, set down this portrait: a perfectly healthy, strong and active young man, 25 years of age, nervo-bilious temperament, 5 feet 6 inches in height, average weight 150 pounds, possessing an iron will as well as an iron frame, muscular system unusually well developed, having had scarcely a day's illness from his childhood to the date of his injury. It was said that he may have first worked with explosives in his youth, upon farms and in nearby mines and quarries. His aptitude for the work was evident early. By July of 1848, he was employed on construction of the Hudson River Railroad near Cortlandt Town in New York. By September of that same year, he had risen to the position of blasting foreman on the Rutland and Burlington Railroad project in Vermont, retained by his employers as, in their own words, their most efficient and capable foreman. The work of a blastingman was both skilled and dangerous. A hole would be bored deep into the rock face, sometimes 12 feet or more in depth. Blasting powder and a fuse were set within the lowest portion of this bore. Sand, clay, or other inert material was then packed firmly above the charge, tamped down with the iron bar, so that the explosive force would be directed in the surrounding rock rather than discharged harmlessly upward. It was precise, exacting labour, demanding both confidence and concentration. Phineas Gage had mastered it completely. For the purpose of this work, he had commissioned a custom-made tamping iron from a neighbouring blacksmith. Tints tapered to a point at the thinner end, round and comparatively smooth along its length. It was unlike any other such implement, made expressly to please the fancy of its owner. He considered it among his most valued possessions. Mainz, the 13th of September, began in the manner of all the working days that had preceded it. Phineas Gage and his crew were engaged upon the preparation of the railroad bed south of the village of Cavendish, blasting through outcroppings of rock that stood in the path of progress. Mainz, it was shortly past the midday hour that the afternoon's labour commenced in earnest, the men moving with the practised rhythms of their trade. By 4:30 o'clock in the afternoon, Gage was engaged in the setting of a blast. The process was familiar, repeated hundreds of times before without incident. The borehole had been prepared. The blasting powder and fuse had been placed at the deepest point. What was required now was the tamping of the inert material above the charge, the minor step that would contain the blast and direct its force. It was at this moment that his attention was drawn away. Members of his crew were working behind him, and Gage turned, looking over his right shoulder. Mines inadvertently bringing his head into alignment with the borehole and with the tamping iron that rested within it. His mouth opened, as if to address the men. At that instant, the tamping iron struck against the rock and produced a spark. The cause that most readily presented itself to those who later studied the matter was that the sand had been omitted from the bore. The inert, packing material that should have separated the iron from the powder had not been applied, leaving the charge exposed. The powder ignited. The explosion drove the tamping iron from the hole with tremendous force. Rocketed upward, the iron entered the left side of Gage's face just forward of the angle of the lower jaw. It continued upward, passing outside the upper jaw and behind the left eye. It traversed the left side of the brain, pince, then exited completely through the upper portion of the skull, passing through the frontal bone. The iron landed point first, some 80 feet distant, smeared, as witnesses recorded, with blood and brain matter. Gage was thrown onto his back. His arms and legs gave some brief convulsions. The men of his crew stood in stunned silence, anticipating only one outcome. They were in this entirely mistaken. Within a few minutes of the explosion, to the astonishment of all present, Phineas Gage was sitting upright. He spoke. He appeared coherent. It was reported that he walked with little assistance to a waiting ox cart, to mince which Cowan paid him the 3/4 of a mile to his lodgings in the town of Cavendish, where he sat upright throughout the journey. Approximately 30 minutes after the accident, physician Edward H. Williams arrived upon the scene to find Gage seated in a chair outside the hotel. Dr. Williams later set down his account of the encounter. "When I drove up," he said, "Doctor, here is business enough for you. I first noticed the wound upon the head before I alighted from my carriage, the pulsations of the brain being very distinct. The top of the head appeared somewhat like an inverted funnel, as if some wedge-shaped body had passed from below upward. Mr. Gage, during the time I was examining this wound, was relating the manner in which he was injured to the bystanders. Dr. Williams confessed that he did not at first believe Gage's own account of what had transpired. Gage insisted that the bar had passed through his head. As the physician continued his examination, Gage rose to vomit, and the effort forced out through the exit wound at the crown of the skull approximately half a teacupful of brain matter, which fell upon the floor. Dr. John Martyn Harlow took charge of the case at approximately 6 o'clock in the evening. He later recalled the scene as one that would have been, to any physician unaccustomed to the wounds of military surgery, truly terrific in its appearance. Gage, he noted, recognized him at once and expressed the hope that he was not much hurt. He appeared perfectly conscious, though weakened by hemorrhage. With Dr. Williams in attendance, Harlow shaved the scalp around the region of the exit wound, then removed coagulated blood, small bone fragments, and what he estimated as an ounce or more of protruding brain matter. After careful probing for foreign bodies, he replaced 2 large detached pieces of bone and closed the wound with adhesive straps, leaving it partially open for drainage. The entrance wound in the cheek was bandaged loosely for the same purpose. A wet compress was applied, followed by a nightcap and further bandaging to secure the dressings. Harlow also attended to deep burns upon Gage's hands and forearms and ordered that his head be kept elevated. Late upon that first evening, Dr. Harlow recorded in his notes that Gage's mind was clear, that there was constant motion in the legs, and that Gage had stated he did not care to receive visitors, as he expected to be at work again within a few days. The convalescence that followed was neither swift nor certain. On the morning after the accident, Gage recognized his mother and uncle, who had traveled from Lebanon in New Hampshire, some 30 miles distant, to be at his side. On the second day, he became decidedly delirious. His condition rose and fell in the days that followed. By the 12th day after the injury, he had entered a semi-comatose state, responding to those around him only in monosyllables. By the 14th day, Harlow's notes record that the exhalations from the wound had become horribly fetid. An infectious process had taken hold. Fungoid tissue, deteriorated and infected matter, had begun to protrude from the exit wound at the top of the skull and from the left eye socket. The family and attendants, Harlow noted, were in hourly expectation of his death, and had prepared his coffin and his burial garments. Harlow did not yield to this expectation. He removed the fungoid tissue with a scalpel, made free application of crystalline silver nitrate to disinfect the wound, and laid open the frontalis muscle from the exit wound to the bridge of the nose, releasing 8 fluid ounces of foul-smelling pus mixed with blood. The drainage thus established proved decisive. On the 24th day after the accident, Gage succeeded in raising himself from his bed and taking one step to his chair. A month later he was walking up and down the stairs. By the 10th week he was strong enough to return to his parents' home in Lebanon, New Hampshire, travelling in an enclosed conveyance. Though considerably weakened upon his arrival, he continued to improve. By February of the following year he was able to perform light work about the farm. By the summer months he was able to endure a half-day of field labour. Dr. Harlow later concluded, physically, the recovery was quite complete during the 4 years immediately succeeding the injury. In November of 1849, Professor Henry Jacob Bigelow, the professor of surgery at Harvard Medical School, brought Gage to Boston for an extended period of examination. After satisfying himself that the tamping iron had indeed passed through Gage's skull, Bigelow presented him before a meeting of the Boston Society for Medical Improvement, and in July of 1850 published a detailed account of the case in the American Journal of the Medical Sciences. Gage's skull, his tamping iron, and his history were now the property of medical science, subjects of scrutiny and of debate that would endure long beyond his own, lifetime. Upon attempting to return to his position with the railroad contractors in the course of 1849, Gage encountered a verdict he had perhaps not anticipated. His employers, who had once regarded him as the most capable and efficient foreman in their employ, found themselves unable to give him his place again. The change in his conduct had been, in their judgment, too marked to be overlooked. Dr. Harlow, who remained the principal source of observation upon Gage's altered character, recorded the following assessment, setting it down at the time of the early post-accident period, though not publishing it until 1868, after Gage's death. The equilibrium or balance, so to speak, between his intellectual faculties and animal propensities seems to have been destroyed. He is fitful, irreverent, indulging at times in the grossest profanity, which was not previously his custom, manifesting but little deference for his fellows, impatient of restraint or advice when it conflicts with his desires, at times pertinaciously obstinate yet capricious and vacillating, devising many plans of future operations, which are no sooner arranged than they are abandoned in turn for others appearing more feasible. Those who had known Gage before the accident, said Harlow, expressed the matter plainly. His friends and acquaintances concluded that he was no longer Gage. It is important to note, and Dr. Harlow himself took pains to record, that Gage's memory and general intelligence appeared largely unimpaired beyond the delirium of the early days. The changes were of a different order. In temperament, in social conduct, in the regulation of impulse. Unable to reclaim his post on the railroad, Gage capitalized for a time upon his unexpected notoriety. He made public appearances in the larger towns of New England, and for a period he was to be found at Barnum's American Museum in New York City, where his case drew considerable public attention. He worked thereafter for approximately 18 months with the owner of a livery and coaching service in Hanover, New Hampshire. In August of 1852, Gage accepted an invitation to travel to Chile, there to work as a long-distance stagecoach driver on the arduous route between Valparaiso and Santiago. He would care for horses and frequently drive a coach heavily laden with passengers, drawn by 6 horses across difficult and mountainous roads. He remained in this position for approximately 7 years. In the middle months of 1859, Gage's health began to fail. He left Chile for San Francisco, where his mother and sister had settled, arriving, in his mother's own words, as later relayed to Dr. Harlow, in a feeble condition, having failed very much since he had departed New Hampshire. He had suffered many ill turns during his final year in Valparaiso, along with much hardship and exposure. Under the care of his mother and sister in San Francisco, he experienced a partial recovery. Anxious, by his own account, to work, he found employment with a farmer in the district of Santa Clara. In February of 1860, however, he began to suffer epileptic seizures. He lost his position. The seizures grew in frequency and severity. On the 18th day of May, 1860, Gage left Santa Clara and returned to his mother's household. On the 20th of May, at 5 o'clock in the morning, he suffered a severe convulsion. The family physician was summoned. The convulsions were repeated frequently throughout the succeeding day and night. Phineas Gage died on the 21st day of May, 1860, in status epilepticus, that is, in a state of prolonged and unrelenting seizure, in or near the city of San Francisco. He was 36 years of age. He was interred at Lone Mountain Cemetery in San Francisco. The tamping iron, which had been his constant companion throughout the remaining 12 years of his life, later recovered from the museum that held it. Dr. Harlow, by that time a prominent physician and civic figure in Woburn, Massachusetts, had lost all contact with Gage for a number of years prior to his death. In 1866, he learned that Gage had died in California and made contact with the family. At his request, Gage's family had the skull exhumed from its place of burial and personally delivered it to Harlow, together with the tamping iron. In 1868, Harlow presented these to the Massachusetts Medical Society, together with a comprehensive retrospective account of the case. He thereafter deposited both the skull and the iron at the Warren Anatomical Museum at Harvard Medical School, where they remain to this day. Upon the skull, the passage of the iron rod is recorded in bone, the entry point at the left cheek, the exit through the crown of the frontal bone, and the quadrangular fragment of bone that, as Harlow noted upon examination in 1849, was raised and quite prominent upon the top of the head. The plaster life cast made by Bigelow in late 1849 likewise survives, recording the features of a man described by those who identified a daguerreotype portrait taken sometime after January of 1850 as disfigured yet still handsome, well-dressed and confident, even proud. There is a further dimension to the legacy of Phineas Gage that merits honest, mind's acknowledgement. Over the many decades since his death, published accounts, including scientific ones, have, as the psychologist Malcolm Macmillan exhaustively documented, almost always severely exaggerated and distorted the extent of his behavioral changes. A violence, a vagrancy, a complete dissolution of social function has been attributed to him that no person who ever met him, nor any member of his family, ever recorded. The known facts are, in Macmillan's words, inconsistent with the common view of Gage as a brawling, foul-mouthed drifter unable to hold employment. Indeed, after the years of exhibition and initial post-recovery travel, Gage supported himself for the greater part of his remaining life at just two occupations: coachman in New Hampshire and stagecoach driver in Chile. The case of Phineas Gage endures not as a simple tale of catastrophe, but as something more intricate and more instructive, a study in the brain's capacity to sustain grievous injury and yet persist, in the partial, imperfect, hard-won nature of recovery, minds, and in the readiness of those who come after to fit a small number of facts to the theory they most desire to prove. In the Warren Anatomical Museum at Harvard Medical School, housed now within the Francis A. Countway Library of Medicine, the skull and the iron rest together still, bearing witness, in silence, time, to what occurred south of Cavendish on an autumn afternoon in 1848.